everyone, and welcome to this week's Monday Memo. And today I'd like to share some thoughts about an idea I came across when I was looking to understand how we in finance could become better at balancing value creation as well as the transactional efficiency that we're expected to deliver to our business. I mean, that's what we've been doing for many thousands of years, is figuring out how to better record data, report it, analyze it. And then how do we sort of get that balance right between taking that, what we do there, and sort of meeting increasing stakeholder expectations? How can we leverage that and the new technologies we have to go and create and capture value? And this idea I'm going to share is something that I found is very useful to you, not just in terms of your current work in finance, but also outside of finance as well. And before I explain it to you, I want you to sort of complete an exercise. And as part of that, I'd like you to imagine yourself on a tropical deserted island. For those of you that are watching the video, I've got one up here. And, on this tropical deserted island, the sky is clear, the wind is calm, the sea is smooth. And, you'll only be on this island for a few minutes, so don't worry. But imagine now that you've arrived on this island and you've arrived there without any roles. Those roles we play as a wife, a husband, as a CFO, as a vice president of finance, as a scratch golfer, so on. Those roles do not exist on this island. So what I'd like you to now do is that, given the following scale, rate yourself. With 0 being the lowest end of the scale and 10 being the highest end of the scale, where would you place yourself on that scale when you take those roles away? When you strip away your roles, what would you score yourself out of 0 to 10? And also, as you're doing that, take a bit of time to think about how would you describe yourself in 1 or 2 sentences without any roles. So how did you rate yourself? What rating did you give yourself once you stripped yourself of all your roles? And when and as you do that, think about, what are you left with? Well, you're left with your self-concept, your self-image, or what I like to call your identity. And the thing is, there is actually a right or wrong answer to this. Even though there is a rating scale between 0 and 10, there is one right answer. But most people actually give the wrong answer. Most people actually would rate themselves less than a 10 when actually the right answer is a 10. And this is something I often sort of get blank faces or challenge back on, is how can you give yourself a 10? Nobody's perfect, or my roles are make me who I am. And you can't separate your roles from your identity. And I sort of challenge, so, well, yes. I mean, if you think about it, when we're born, we entered in this world really without much in the way of roles. And roles are something we acquire and inherit throughout life. And in fact, whether we're doing our accounting exams or was it the exams we did at school, we'd be constantly rated, and our feelings and our sense of identity would be caught up in how we're being rated on those things. I mean, did anyone ever get a school report that said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Jimmy's not very good with numbers, but you should be very proud of your son. He's a very well-adjusted individual and will make a great contribution to society. Now, no, I mean, people tend to sort of focus on the results of the roles we play rather than identity, and therefore we don't tend to focus on it. And I think this is the big thing for us in finance, is essentially, with the evolution of technology, with the increasing expectations around us, we're being expected to perform at higher levels and go and actually add more value. That feels like sometimes we're being overwhelmed. How do we keep up with everything? And it's like, well, it's difficult, but one thing that we don't have to keep up with is our identity. We should know that. And that's why I use the analogy of an island, because we're all islands in amongst other islands. And on that island, there's certain things about us that are unique to us, that we value. We've got particular strengths. It's where the name of the show comes from, Strength in the Numbers. We all have strengths within our finance community that we can leverage to contribute not just to our organizations, but to others, across our profession, but also within our society. And you could be saying to yourself, well, Andrew, why does it matter what my identity is? Isn't it all really about my role performance? Well, actually, I think there's a bit more to it than that, and I think a lot of companies are actually wasting a lot of money sending people on training that aren't necessarily suitable to either their roles or their identity. And I'd like to give this example of Jonathan. And before I go into this case of Jonathan, what I like to do, because of this confusion between identity and role, I like to separate them out between two axes. I being one sort of scaling system, and R for role being the other one. And when I asked Jonathan this question about how would he rate his identity when you strip the roles away, Jonathan rated himself as a 5. And Jonathan's role was essentially as a finance controller that was responsible for doing the month-end reporting, closing the books on time, providing reporting, and a bit of analysis that went with it. And, Jonathan reported into a finance director, and that finance team reported into a CFO, who at one point in time changed out for a new CFO and a new management team that had come in with sort of higher expectations on what was expected from finance. As in, they wanted finance to, gain a seat at the table, be part of helping the business go and drive better decision making, better decisions that would increase shareholder value. And the finance director, so Jonathan's line manager at the time, could see this, but could see that Jonathan wasn't necessarily sort of cut out for that type of work. So suggested to Jonathan to go on to a course to improve his skills, particularly around communication and so on. So Jonathan went on this course, and suddenly he managed to sort of embrace the ideas around data visualization, how he could use SQL to improve and speed up his reporting, how he could develop stories better and communicate the numbers across to non-financial professionals. And he comes back to his line manager saying, "Thank you so much for sending me such a great course. I've got so many ideas on what I want to do. Can't wait to start putting them in." But then, remember, Jonathan was still an I5, but maybe he started rating his ability to do his role as an R10. And over the next week or two, Jonathan started thinking to himself, well, this is quite tough to go do, and it's probably not really who I am, doing all of these things. And suddenly his role performance started going back towards the level of a 5. So it was trending towards him being as an I5, and the reason why his identity mattered is because that's where Jonathan's comfort zone was. Jonathan's comfort zone is always at a 5. That's what he identified with. So his role performance might take a temporary up to a 10, but over time is going to come back down towards a 5. Where, let's face it, if his line manager was concerned about it before, he's going to be more concerned about it now, and Jonathan's going to be under a lot of pressure because the role expectations of those around him aren't really aligning with his identity. He didn't see in his identity that he was there to play this bigger game. And that's really, really difficult. And a lot of finance professionals are finding themselves in that scenario. And then we've got others, like Katie, for instance, who was always at an I10. She really had a good sense of her identity, her values, what her strengths were, what she wanted out of a role. And Katie, because of that sort of role and identity performance, got promoted to a finance director. But the thing is, like, as a lot of people who get promoted, their role performance immediately drops in that new environment because guess what? They're new to it. There's still a bit of learning to go on, and they I suppose they're sort of under pressure, and they feel that pressure. But because their identity is still a 10, and they've separated their identity from their role, their subconscious will start doing something about it and trying to find answers to get them from what might be, say, an R2 level up towards an R10, so it aligns with the I10. Because as human beings, we tend to align with our self-identity. And in terms of doing that, what Katie started to do was she started to go and identify what needed to be done to be an R10. And then she started talking to people, getting mentors assigned, figuring out what works, what doesn't, doing the necessary trainings to get near to being an R10. And within 6 months later, she'd actually managed to get back to an I10, R10 level. So that's why knowing our identity, but also knowing what our role is and where we are, and making sure that we're either rating ourselves appropriately in our identity and aligning what we do in our roles with that, and making sure we're doing the right training and have the right supports to get there, is highly important to have rewarding and meaningful and successful careers in finance nowadays. And that's why we bring on mentors to the Strength in the Numbers show to share with you their stories of what works, what doesn't. Help reinforce this sort of idea that yes, whilst transactional efficiency and doing the fundamental well is really important, we need to appreciate where we fit in, where does our identity fit in, and how we can leverage our identity to deliver the appropriate level of role performance. And that awareness, again, will help us go and get the most out of our careers in finance. If you enjoyed yourselves, and if you did, please remember to let your friends and colleagues know about it. They can subscribe at all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. And we really appreciate you investing your time with us today. So until next time, take care of yourselves, and let's keep on building our strength in the numbers.